obviously kind of the point person for coordinating our response. So a little bit about me. Uh, you heard I was the chief pilot for the New York City Police Department. I flew for several years for the Newark Police Department, just to our west. And a little bit more about me. I'm on the fast team, a couple of things, but we'll go right past that. Okay, so what do I hope we learned today? Just want to describe the events of that day from my perspective, some of the operational impacts, the challenges and concerns we had, and hopefully that we'll never forget. I often speak about 9/11, particularly this time of year, and while we certainly saw the worst in humanity on September 11th, I do like to say on September 12th, we saw the best in humanity, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. This is a sensitive topic. There's some sensitive content. I went to great lengths. I don't have any particular graphic photos. However, people all experience this in different ways. So you could be triggered. Just be aware of that. Once again, nothing in my opinion that's graphic. Uh, so just a warning to all that some of the pictures could be triggering. And as always, pilots, I do these presentations in memory of the firefighters, police officers, all first responders that lost their lives. I lost about 10 to 12 personal friends that day, and I never want their memory to be lost to time. Okay, so my direct role, as I mentioned, I was not flying during the actual attacks. I was back at the Aviation Unit Command Center, back at our base. I flew later in the day, 2 o'clock-ish or so. The towers had long since fallen. Building number 7 had fallen. World Trade Center building 7 had fallen. So while I did fly later in the day, during the actual attacks itself, my role was to coordinate our response. A little bit about the timeline of that day. At 8:46, American Flight 11 that was coming from Boston crashed into the North Tower. About 15 minutes later, about 17 minutes later, United Flight 175, also from Boston, crashed into the South Tower. At 9:59, the South Tower fell first, although it was hit second. There's a reason for that I will discuss. And then at 10:28, the North Tower at the World Trade Center collapsed. Okay, so here's a picture of our Bell 412, a Statue of Liberty in the foreground. In the background, those are the Twin Towers. For perspective, we are looking south to north. The North Tower's to the left here, the South Tower's to the right. September 11th, a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful day. That was September 11th, 2001. Not a cloud in the sky. An absolutely gorgeous day. No one had a care in the world, not knowing the day would end, impacting our lives for the rest of our lives. So it was kind of ironic this past September 11th, how it was a picture perfect day. It was exactly it. I had a little bit of a flashback. I was like, this is exactly what September 11th, 2001 looked like. So at 8:45, this was September 11th. Uh, we're looking in this picture, I'm looking west to east. So the North Tower is to our left, the South Tower is to our right. This is a picture captured off a surveillance video at 8:46. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, you could see American Flight 11 proceeding southbound, where the cowards flying the plane are about to crash into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And at 8:46, American Flight 11 impacts the North Tower. Our initial response was sort of standard. How did the call come in? It came in as a plane possibly hit the World Trade Center. Uh, while certainly an unusual type of call, it wasn't crazy. We receive calls like that throughout the year, some crazy calls. So we sent our initial response package was the Bell 412 here on the left. That's our air sea rescue helicopter. That's staffed by 2 pilots, a rescue crew chief in the back, who's a member of the aviation unit, and is also an A&P mechanic. And then we also have 2 scuba divers from the harbor unit. So it's a 5-person crew. That's 24/7, 365. It's our air sea rescue helicopter. To the right, we assigned a Jet Ranger. That was our primary patrol aircraft at the time, and that's staffed by 2 pilots, more as a command and control function. The 412 would be the rescue function. Our base, this is Floyd Bennett Field. It's in Brooklyn. At the time, we had 6 helicopters, 2 search and rescue, 2 412s, and 4 patrol aircraft. It's an old Navy airfield. It's an old Coast Guard air station, which we now occupy, and it's about 10 miles southeast of the World Trade Center. So this is from the helicopter route chart. If you look towards the center at the bottom, that's where the NYPD is based. So we're about 10 miles southeast of the World Trade Center. So a little bit of a response time, 3 to 5 minutes. And this is what the crews were met with. These photos are compliments of one of my colleagues, Detective Greg Semendinger. He was flying the 412 on this day. And here's a picture of the North Tower that had been hit. We're looking from north to south. So facing us, the hole is where American Flight 11 went into the building. The North Tower, the one on the right here that was hit, is not the tower that had the tourist deck. It had a radio tower, as you can see right there. And that's what they were first met with, massive smoke obscuring the South Tower already, and that got worse as the day went on. If you look to the right-hand side of the North Tower, you see what looks like a white box. That's a window washing unit. It did play a role in our response. I'll explain in just a few minutes how that impacted us. This is just a view from the 412 cockpit. And what was our initial response? People say, what were you going to do? The Jet Ranger was going to do a command and control situation reports to ground commanders, determine if a rooftop rescue were possible, and how we would go about doing a rooftop rescue. Once again, the North Tower, we're looking kind of west to east, west to northeast, if you will. So this is the south side of the building. The reason I like to show this photo is it gives you an idea of the impact at the back end. So American Flight 11 went into this building looking at this photo from left to right. This is the back side of the building. So the aircraft almost penetrated the entire building. Photo, once again, looking west to east. To the left-hand side is the impact where the jet went into the building. The right-hand side is the results of that. At the upper corner there, you could see that window washing unit I referred to and the World Trade Center antenna in the center there. Same building. Now we're looking north to south. What's facing us is where Flight 11 impacted the building. Here's a picture of the rooftop, the lower left here, sort of in the center of our photo. That's that window washing unit that rotated around the top. The window washers would suspend themselves from that to wash windows. But the reason I show this photo is I give people a sense of what did the rooftop look like. In a few minutes, I'm going to talk about was a rooftop rescue possible. But this is what the rooftop looked like. This is a raw picture. They couldn't even see the roof. And here's another a close-up photo. The building has been hit. Those are all various antennas. The large antenna is in the upper center of the photo. The reason I like to show this photo is even if a rooftop rescue was possible, we probably could not land on the roof because the World Trade Center rented out the rooftop for all of these antennas, and they rent them out for a considerable amount of money. So the roof was literally a forest of antennas. Sadly, these are some of the people above the impact zone awaiting rescue. To this day, many of our pilots suffer some PTSD. We're told we're trained, we have the best equipment in the world, the best training in the world, And all of us felt sort of helpless as to be able to help these people above the impact zone. Just some more people trying to relay information to us, that what floor they were on. People were holding up signs, and we got a sense of how many people were trapped above the impact zone. I'm going to show this. This does not have audio. I just want to give you a sense. It's brief. It's a brief video. It's only about 2 minutes, but this is a very raw video filmed by one of the pilots on board the 412 with a very archaic video camera from, remember, it's almost 25 years ago. And as I mentioned, there is no sound, and the sound's not even necessary. Now, this video, pilots, is the South Tower collapsing. Remember, I mentioned it got hit second but fell first. All right, so that was sort of what they were faced with, and that was the collapse of the South Tower. As our aircraft were surveying the scene, we obviously knew we had a huge disaster on our hands. The North Tower had been hit, and at 9:03 a.m., the crew does see a 757 at, at about the Verrazano Bridge, which is south of the World Trade Center site, proceeding northbound up the lower New York Bay, and at an incredibly high rate of speed. And this is what they see: a 757 crash right into the South Tower. If there was any doubt, which there was very little doubt that this was a intentional act with the first aircraft, it certainly was erased by the impact of the second aircraft hitting the South Tower. The moment of impact, they were going faster than Flight 11. The impact was greater, and that's the moment of impact. That's the South Tower on the left. On the right here, we're looking from west to east. To the right would be the impact zone. To the left would be the other side of the building where the plane sort of or parts came out. Another picture from the ground, North Tower to the right, the South Tower to the left at the moment of impact. And there it is. That's Brooklyn Bridge in the foreground there, moment of impact hitting the South Tower to the right. Okay, at about 9:25, so about 22 minutes later, the U.S. military did arrive over Manhattan, consisted of units from the National Guard from Cape Cod, from F-15s from Cape Cod, F-16s came from Atlantic City. They started to establish a CAP, a combat air patrol, right over Manhattan, and that combat air patrol lasted for several months, up to 6 months later. They would fly during the day, they would fly at approximately 15,000 feet. At night, though, they would drop down to maybe 3,000 feet. We were in constant contact with them. We would talk to them all the time. There were some incidents that happened post 9/11. One I'll talk about in a little bit, which was interesting. And we had a terrific cooperation with the military for well, a very close cooperation for the next 6 months, and we that cooperation remains to this day. Chaos and confusion. There certainly was the information was difficult to come by in the sense that this is, remember, 25 years ago. Cell phone networks were fairly new. They were overwhelmed. Landlines were overwhelmed. The radios among first responders were overwhelmed. At the NYPD Aviation Base, we received reports that there's fighters over Manhattan from foreign nations. Chinese fighters were attacking Manhattan. Russian fighters were over Manhattan. And most concerning to us, we received reports that there were 6 to 10 additional airliners and they were headed towards New York City. So we really had to come up quickly with a response plan. Some additional issues, a story that's well told. Air traffic control did an unbelievably terrific job. After all the aircraft were finally landed that they could, they evacuated JFK, LGA, LaGuardia, and Newark. The reason they did that, there were reports that some airliners were going to hit the control towers. As I did mention, our communication issues were probably the biggest issue of the day. The first response frequencies, police, fire, EMS, overloaded. Hard to get transmissions through. Cell service was minimal. That was overloaded. Conventional telephone service was overloaded. That was hard to use. So what do we do back at the base? We determined if the crash was intentional or accidental. That answer came quite quickly. We contacted with all our air traffic control towers, which we do have a terrific relationship with, and to coordinate what we were going to do. What do they see? What are they hearing? And they received the same reports that additional airliners were headed towards Manhattan. We had to contact other law enforcement units for mutual aid, contact with the U.S. military. At the time, we did not have a formal way to talk to the U.S. military. After 9/11, we established a DEN line, a domestic events network line, where we had direct contact with the U.S. military just by picking up the phone. And we had to call in additional personnel. It was all hands on deck, obviously. Personnel numbered about 60 to 70 at the time. We called everyone in. And in an interesting sidebar here, we realized pretty quickly that this event was not going to be a 2 or 3 hour event. This was going to be a 2 or 3 month, if not longer, event. So once all the personnel responded, at about 1, 2 o'clock, we had to make a decision, and we did. We sent about half the unit home with the instructions to get some rest. They were going to report back at 10 o'clock that night. The pace of operations was fast. The pace of operations was heavy. We knew the initial responders were going to be fatigued, and they stayed until about 10 o'clock that night, and then we swapped personnel. The other half of the unit came in, and we ran 12-hour shifts for about 6 months, where some people worked the overnights, some officers worked during the day. So at 9:59, the South Tower collapsed first. Although I mentioned it was attacked second, it fell first. A picture of the South Tower at moment of impact. So the South Tower collapses. The pilots felt, certainly not engineers by any stretch of the imagination, but they did transmit that, in their opinion, the towers were in danger of collapse. There's always been a lot of controversy who heard that, because the frequencies were overloaded, but they did clearly transmit that they felt the towers were in danger of collapsing. And that's a picture from the 412 cockpit. That's the South Tower collapsing. And the result a few hours later. So why did the South Tower fall first? MIT up in Boston did an analysis. They estimated the plane, the United Flight 75, was traveling at about 537 miles per hour, while the American Flight 11 was 429. Doesn't seem like that vast of a difference, but if you do the math and do the formula, the impact is almost exponential. So 100 miles, a little more than 100 miles faster, was had a lot more devastating effect. The South Tower was hit at a lower point, so it had more weight, was bearing down on the floors. And then the United jet, they estimate, had 50% more energy on impact than United Flight 11. I should mention, let me go back real quick. A Another factor, the coward flying flight, the United flight, at the moment of impact, you may have noticed he banked to about a 60-degree bank angle. United Flight 11 flew right into the towers in level flight. What did that mean? It meant the United jet took out several more floors than United 11. So it caused more damage on its initial impact. And here's a graphic that shows you on the right, the World Trade Center, the North Tower, or Tower 1, was hit higher, collapsed at 102 minutes, and then Tower 2 was hit at lower, 77th to the 85th floor. And once again, though, I call it a knife edge. He banked to about 60-degree left bank, and he impacted the tower and took out more floors. The North Tower, about a half hour later, collapsed, and this is the North Tower collapsing. Tower number 2 is already down, and this created what I call a nuclear winter. This cloud stayed over Manhattan for weeks, if not months, and that's the North Tower collapsing. All photos taken by the police helicopter, because at this time the airspace was frozen to anyone but law enforcement and military. And it's creating that nuclear winter. As you see, that mushroom cloud, I call it, I know it's not a nuclear, is starting to spread out along lower Manhattan, going down all the streets. And a lot of people were trapped by this, what we learned to be a very toxic plume. Here it is spreading out. A moment after this, all the buildings are obscured, and you really look like this photo here, a nuclear winter, if you will. And this cloud, this smoke, stayed over Manhattan for approximately, certainly several weeks, even a few months. And there's just the towers. Both towers are down, and they are. It's turned into just this toxic plume of. That's the police helicopter. We're looking from north to south. If you look in the background, that's the Verrazano Bridge. And this is after both towers have collapsed, and there's that smoke, which not only was obviously very visible for hundreds of miles, satellite images picked it up. It was that thick, that large. Okay. The reason I show this photo is, interestingly enough, if you look to the lower left, there's a little park there. That park is for reasons we don't know, those buildings shielded that park from any debris getting onto it. So looking at this toxic cloud, it moved no further left or no further to the north. That became known, what we called landing zone number 1. All of our operations for helicopters at the World Trade Center site, we use that as a landing zone for probably 9 months. It was just for helicopter use only, and that grass area in the lower left remained just as a grass area. And just another picture of cloud where we are now looking to the northeast. You see the Empire State Building in Midtown to the left there. This cloud was moving southwest, and the lower left there, you could see where that landing zone 1 was created, and no debris ever hit that field. Kind of unusual. There's LZ1 once again. No debris ever reached that park. Okay. Just a few more photos. I like to show the magnitude of this cloud. I always thought people didn't realize how it looked. Sort of a dramatic picture. We have our Statue of Liberty, of course, and the World Trade Center has fallen. People always ask you what was one of the stark, what do I remember? And quite honestly, the Class B airspace of New York City, I kind of call it my home. I grew up here. I flew thousands of hours here, very comfortable in this airspace. And when I would lift off from Floyd Bennett Field, I would always look up and see the skyline of Manhattan, punctuated by the World Trade Center, the Empire State Building, and they always called it my skyline. That was my skyline. That was mine. Uh, it never was the same again. For years, when we would lift off, you certainly didn't see the World Trade Center. They were gone, and it took quite a while to be rebuilt. So it just changed that landscape. That was a very stark reminder to me. Not only had the world changed, but my world changed in a very personal way. A question I get asked all the time: was a rooftop helicopter rescue possible on September 11th, 2001? And let's go back a little bit. We'll go back to 1993, the first attack. These photos are courtesy of my first commanding officer, Captain Bill Wilkins. Rest in peace. He just passed away. Terrific guy, terrific commander. The picture on the left, that's the North Tower. If you look, it's relatively clean. By 2000, this was 1993. By 2001, there was a forest of antennas there. In the background, tower number two, that deck is the tourist deck, which you might be familiar with. If you look, there is a helipad, not an active helipad. There's a target where the helicopter would land if we had to land on the roof. So in 1993, you might recall, there was a terrorist bombing in the basement. They blew up a car bomb, and we did end up rescuing quite 28 people from the North Tower. It was the North Tower that was bombed. The South Tower was not. Using us and the emergency service unit, we airlifted about 28 people to safety. What was the difference? And the difference is the bombing was in the basement parking garage. So 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet away from the roof. The rooftop was relatively clean in the sense that there was no smoke, no debris up there. The antennas were relatively less at the time. There was no smoke or heat. It was good visibility. It was determined that the landings can be done safely. On September 11th, in my professional opinion, there wasn't a chance. Talk a little bit about it. We all do flight risk assessments, FRAT. We had to do one in about 5 minutes. And a couple of things. There was absolutely no signs that anyone was on the roof. The doors were presumably locked. The World Trade Center doors are locked to protect those antennas. However, they have to have a means to open them in an emergency. How did the World Trade Center do that? They had a command center on the 50th floor of the North Tower. When Flight 11 hit, they severed all the cables that went from that command center up to the roof. So even if anyone made it to the roof, which was probably unlikely because of the amount of smoke at those stairwells at the top of the roof, they probably could not get out onto the roof. They were probably still locked. We'll never know that answer, but there was absolutely at no point did the pilot see the command and control aircraft, the 412, any crew member saw anyone on that roof. So our FRAT was extreme risk, extreme danger. And if it was attempted, it's hazardous under good conditions. As we all know as pilots, the wind at 1,200 feet is dramatically different than the ground. Obstacles. This is the only possibility of an approach to Tower 1, the North Tower. Once again, I'm looking west to east. To the left is the impact zone. At the top is that window washer unit that I've referenced before. We would have to have done a downwind approach and land at the corner of the World Trade Center. There certainly couldn't be a landing. We would have had to do a high hover and probably rappel the emergency service officers to the roof. But there were some other issues. The South Tower, there certainly could be no landing or any consideration. That was completely obscured by smoke from the first tower. You couldn't even see the top of the tower as this picture shows. The wind direction, it was going towards the southwest, so we'd have to do a downwind approach. If you are familiar with turbine engines, they're very sensitive to heat and smoke. So you don't have a large window to work with that you would overtemp the engines, and the smoke filled with debris, filled with a whole bunch of dirty air. We would have ingested that air, a lot of FOD. I think we likely would have had a flame out. Uh, Pictures here, left and right, very difficult to see. But on the right-hand picture, if you look, you could just make out in about the center of the picture, there were guide wires holding up the tower. They were incredibly difficult to see, and it does surround all corners of the antenna. So we would have to contend with a downwind approach, have very hot, toxic smoke, these wires, which are incredibly difficult to see, and pilots would have had to done the approach to get into a position to repel officers to the roof. Here's a better picture. Obviously, the building's not hit, where you could see those wires a little clearer, and they are on all four sides. And the foreground wires you can't even see; they kind of blend in with the antenna. That was the rooftop. Once again, to the left here, the window washing unit was probably the cleanest part of the roof. If anything, when we debriefed the pilots at the end of the day and weeks later, that was the only consideration they were thinking, is dropping a team onto the roof there. Another picture of the rooftop. So we couldn't land onto the roof. We would have had to drop officers to try to clear the roof, and that was our plan. So the aviation issues were the south tower was completely obscured. There was never even a consideration for a landing there. No persons visible on the roof, downwind approach, the debris and FOD flame out. As you got closer to the building, the temperature would rise. If we were going to put people onto the roof, this is our high-rise plan that exists to this day. It's in cooperation with the New York City Fire Department, and it's called the 1077, the high-rise plan. A battalion chief goes up in a helicopter, and today they use the 429. They'll survey the scene and determine the need for a high-rise rescue. If a high-rise rescue is determined to be needed, the 412 will pick up emergency service officers, better known to the general public as our SWAT team, highly trained officers. We work with them extremely closely on a lot of different types of tactical work, rescue work. So the plan was we would hover over the roof, they would rappel down, and then they would have to clear the roof of obstacles. They'd have to knock down those antennas. They'd have to make a big enough LZ where the 412 could land. A second consideration they would have is rooftop security. You can imagine that the 412 lands. If there's 50 people on the roof, we could only probably take at most 10 to 12 at a time. There could be panic, chaos. People rush the helicopter, overload it. Helicopter can't take off again, and we have a second disaster. Once those officers have been rappelled to the roof, while they're clearing the roof, we would fly to the closest heliport and pick up a FDNY ladder company. They would bring up their equipment, and the roof is presumably now cleared. We could land on the roof. They would disembark from the helicopter, and then they would perform rooftop rescues. Once again, 1993, very clean. To the right, not much to clear. We're able to land there. Pretty much was an easy decision. This is after the initial hit. If you see a helicopter in the upper left, that is a media helicopter. They were only there for about 15, 20 minutes, and then they were ordered to the ground. So once again, looking north to south, that's the North Tower, and that's the impact zone, what we're looking at directly. In the days and weeks to follow, some very fast pace of aviation operations. We had fatigue concerns, maintenance concerns. All aircraft were pretty much flying a good 16, 18 hours a day. We had parts concerns. Why did we have parts concerns? As most of you are aware, if you have an aircraft that's AOG, how does the part generally get to you? Through the airlines. They throw the part on an airliner, they fly it to Kennedy, and then it gets to us. I'm sure you all remember airline service was canceled for several days, and we did have one incident where we needed a part critically from Bell Helicopter in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. No aircraft service, no airline service. How would we get it to the aviation unit base? Thanks to our partners in the U.S. military, they flew a fighter, actually, went down and picked it up, and they flew it back to Kennedy Airport, and we went there and picked up the part. So we had the part in a few hours, but that was a concern. How are we going to get parts? Fatigue concerns, the crews were doing 12-hour days, and it was fast paced. I always do like to recall in the middle of this, I like to say this was sort of a forgotten crash, if you will. American Flight 87 on November 12th. So just about 2 months, almost to the day after September 11th, an Airbus A300 crashed into the Rockaway Peninsula in Queens, just south of the aviation base, killing everyone on board. And that was the second deadliest crash in U.S. history, caused by they had a rudder issue. They hit wake turbulence. And so if you could imagine, at the height of the 9/11 operations, the recovery operations, very fast pace, you add this incident to it, and it was truly almost overwhelming. Everyone thought initially this was another plane shot down. Initially, we thought it was another terrorist attack. It was ruled out fairly quickly that it was not, but still just added a whole host of more work to us and the entire first response community, not just us. And then the cleanup took almost a year, May 30th, 2002, so just a couple months shy of a year. The cleanup officially ended. 3.1 million hours of labor to clean up, $750 million. What you're looking at is the reflecting pools of the World Trade Center. That's the footprint of one of the towers that they turned into a pool. And what was the toll? Almost 3,000 persons were killed the day of attack, just shy of 3,000. And sadly, the toll grows. More than 500 first responders have died from 9/11 related illnesses from that day, more than our the initial toll of the day. And, sadly, several friends of mine have passed since that day. And I know several friends that are critically ill today. And it's just, it's a pain that just kind of keeps stabbing at us. What was the bad news? I'll tell you the difficulties. Command and control was virtually non-existent for the first few hours, and that was directly due to communication problems. We could not talk to our leadership downtown. They couldn't speak to us because the phones were down. Cell phone service was almost non-existent. Radios were overwhelmed. We had aircraft respond to Teterboro Airport, which is to our west, and to the Wall Street heliport. We didn't know they were there. They were a mix of law enforcement and military aircraft, and we just didn't know they were there, so we couldn't even use them in any response because we didn't know they were there. What is the good news on the airborne law enforcement side? I had offers of support from every unit across this country. Los Angeles Police Department called me on September 11th, a little later in the day, and I knew the chief pilot at the time. He called me up. He said, "Hey, Ken, how many aircraft you need? We will depart tonight, and we'll probably be there in a day or two. What do you need? We're on our way." And that offer went across the country. I had offers from Florida, Texas, Michigan, the Midwest, Ohio. Every law enforcement unit that could said, "What do you need? We're on our way. We'll be there in a day or two, and we'll give you all the support you need." We do have terrific cooperation with our local law enforcement airborne units, Nassau County Police, which is just to our east, Suffolk County Police, which is just to the east of them. They supplied aircraft every day for months. New York State Police supplied aircraft every day. Fortunately, we did not have to take all these units up on their offer. But boy, I mean, I really could have had 75 to 100 helicopters there probably in a day or two, and I would have been with no problem from around this country. And as I said, September 11th was the first inhumanity. September 12th, in my opinion, was the best in humanity. We weren't cops, firemen, first responders. We were all Americans. That includes everyone. We had support from people showing up, just bringing us food. Uh, everyone, no one could help enough. I had retired officers who retired from the aviation unit who called me up and they said, "Hey, Lieutenant, what do you need? I'll work the fuel truck. I'll tug the aircraft in and out." These were highly experienced pilots, and they knew they couldn't fly. They had been retired. They said, "Whatever you need, call me in. I'm not looking for pay. I'm looking to help. I'll operate the fuel truck. I'll operate the tugs. I'll help the maintenance guys." I had retired mechanics saying, "I'll come in. I'll give the maintenance guys a hand." Anything I needed, I really had at my fingertips, which was pretty incredible. After the event, some of the initiatives the NYPD took, to the left there was our counterterrorism helicopter. At the time, it was discreet, it was unmarked, it was a secret. The media exposed that pretty quickly. And if you look at the end number there, it's November 23 Foxtrot Hotel, and that stood for 23 fallen heroes. The NYPD lost 23 police officers that day. New York City Fire Department lost 343 firefighters, and the Port Authority Police lost 37 police officers. To the right there is a Cessna Caravan that we use to this day. It has radiation detecting equipment. Every ship that comes into New York Harbor, they scan it. They look for a radiation signature, looking for a dirty bomb. Busier than you think. They do get not quite a few hits is overstating it. They do get radiation hits, but it's generally benevolent reasons. It's usually medical equipment is the number one thing they pick up. They'll pick up a radiation source. We notify the Coast Guard. Coast Guard checks the ship. They do sometimes board the ship. They pick up wherever we receive that signature, and they determine the intent of the signature. And so far to this day, knock on wood, it's never been a malicious event. Some of the counterterrorism strategies we do to this day is overnight, our counterterrorism office evaluates world events, any credible threats to New York. And what they do is they release a confidential list of locations that we do directed patrols. The Emergency Service Unit, pictured there, the SWAT team, NYPD Harbor Unit, ourselves, the NYPD Aviation Unit. So, for example, I don't want to jinx a particular country. I'll just say somewhere in the world, a transportation hub is bombed today. Our counterterrorism unit evaluates that, looks at it, and they may come out tomorrow with a list that we want directed patrols at transportation hubs around the city of New York. It's a little bit of a needle in a haystack type approach, but we have intercepted intelligence, particularly of the Brooklyn Bridge. They were a few years later, 2004 to be exact. They planned to do an event, a bombing of the Brooklyn Bridge. And one of the emails that was intercepted, all public knowledge, by the way, I'm not revealing anything that's not public, is they said the weather's too hot. We can't hit the Brooklyn Bridge now. What did they mean by too hot? It was too much of a police presence. The Harbor Unit was there every day. We were there every day. Emergency Service Unit, the SWAT team was there every day. So whoever was doing the particular surveillance reported to their leadership that we don't think we would be successful. Some key takeaways as pilots, you know, I always like to weave it into the hazardous attitudes. You know, think the unthinkable. It can happen to you. If on September 10th at a meeting I said, you know, five airliners tomorrow are going to take out four airliners going to crash in the United States, killing thousands, everyone would have painted me as a nut. And here we are, September 11th. We had all these aircraft, all these airliners crashing, costing thousands of lives. Never give up. You have to improvise, and adapt, and we had to. You know, have contingency plans A, B, C, D, E, F, G. The New York City Police Department started what they call the 96-hour standalone plan. Every unit was tasked with coming up with a plan. How would you respond? How would you operate for 96 hours if you had no direction from above? We couldn't talk to what we call One Police Plaza, our headquarters. So how would we respond in the future? And they gave the commanding officers of the units some powers they don't normally have, almost the power of the police commissioner to do what had to be done to meet the emergency. kind of like our in aviation. We could do what we need to do to meet the emergency. Okay, folks, I thank you so much. Please never forget, uh, from my particular agency, 23 officers. I look up there, and I'm proud to call 10 of